Well, Mike had told me, I said, Mike, I'm a storyteller, and there was, it says singer-songwriter, and I said, I've never written a song, and I said, what are they going to say? He said, well, it'll just be fake news. So I couldn't have that, so there's going to be a tiny little song in here. It's a real pleasure to be here tonight with you in this building. I believe this part of the building we're in right now is 150 years old plus. And I believe it ends right here. And to be here with Art and Dwayne and with Mike, I've really looked forward to it. So this is a fun night for me. So I'm going to tell a story. See, stories connect us. And if we follow that ancestral route that we have and we take it right down into the earth, we'll get back to a time when our ancestors, they were trying to find answers to things they didn't know. And often they did that through story, they did that through myth, and then that was shared through families and throughout generations. It was all spoken word. And that's what connects us all in the theater tonight, is that longing for story and myth in our past. So tonight I'm going to share with you a story about an island in the middle of the ocean. Now before I start, I'd just like to share 3 little facts. One is, one of the characters in this, her name is Chance. Chance is young, Chance is looking for adventure, and she's trying to follow her dreams. A second character in this, her name is Yamaya. Now Yamaya is old. She is ancient really, and she is wise. Wisdom. And the third is there's a flame involved. Now this flame is inside a great big cavern, and it is everything to these people. It provides their heat for their food. It's their spiritual strength. They believe in light of that flame and light of the sun. And it gives them the light to create within this huge cavern. Once upon a time, many, many years ago, there was an island in the middle of the ocean. A bit like us, really. We're in an island in the middle of the ocean. And it was nirvana. It was utopia. It was perfect for the people who lived there, because they had gratitude for the gift that they'd been given. And they had passion. They had passion for romance, and they had passion for the arts. They liked to write, they made music, they told stories, all in that big cavern. You see, a cauldron burned in that huge luminous cavern old. A cauldron before told stories old. A cauldron whose flame was one higher power. But there was one problem. These people did not know how to make flame. They could only fuel the flame they had. That's all they'd ever known. They had no means. So families collected a porous-like fuel, and that's what they used, and they maintained all those big rocks around it, and ovens cooked in the evenings, and they let that fire die down in the day, and they built it back up every single night. Now today we're going to follow a group of young people. They were leaving the cavern to explore the island. That's what they loved doing. And they went out through a long tunnel of rock, and they stepped out and they faced that ocean. Now, this might not be a paradise to some of us, because this island was of savage beauty. I mean, these were storm-swept, rock-strewn beaches. There were standing stones. There were winds that came off that ocean that pushed them inside that cavern for days. And when the days grew short, there was snow. And it was often gray, and it was often raining, and it was often cold, but it was their home, and they loved it. Now, you could see the youth in them. That's so exciting, isn't it? When you can see it in their step, and you can hear it in their voice, and they're magnified against that ocean. It was just all youth. And they took off running. And the one who ran the fastest, who was the furthest in the front, that was Chance. Now, Chance, she was bold. She was strong. And she was young. Chance was intelligent. She was industrious. Chance was full of the wild. And she ran out ahead of them, and she would run to a cliff, and those roiling waters of that ocean below her, and the eddies and the waves crashing, she'd dive into the middle of it. And there'd always be one or two follower, and she'd say to them, look, when you hit that water and you feel that current, don't fight it. Become the current. And it will take you out, but it will bring you back to the shore. And that's what they do. And the others who didn't go, they'd race down those rocks and they'd meet them at the shoreline, and then they'd push up that shore looking for anything those angry waves had tossed up from the ocean. And they'd step into caverns. They were like water caverns. And they would hear their voice echo. They'd lay like seal on the back of those caverns until the tides pushed them out. And they did. And they'd make their way back out of that ocean onto the shore and up the shoreline. Now, on this particular day, they went right to the end of the island. And they had started some exploring, and then the group of them, they looked at the sun peeking through those clouds. Now, it had been chasing them in the morning when they were running through those glens and through the long grasses. But now that sun was starting to set and would soon set into that ocean. And when it did, and it drew that dark veil over that island, you didn't want to be outside. You didn't want to be on a path. So they started to make their way back to the huge cavern, their cavern, with that sacred flame and their families. But one stayed back, and that was Chance. Because when they came out at the end of that island, she looked up and she saw what looked to her like an opening into a cavern. So she let them go, and she climbed the rock, and she stopped when she got to the top because she saw a little opening, and then there was a little pool of water, and behind it was a cauldron. She stood and stared like a setter at a quail. I mean, they never believed there was ever a possibility of another flame on this island, only the one that they had inherited, that they kept burning. And she walked over to it. No fire had ever been lit in it. But there was a sphere, two halves of a sphere, and it was hollow. And they were sitting there, and one had a little bit of black ashes in it, and she dumped that out. And she looked at it. It was a mineral she'd never saw before. It shone, it had been polished, and it had deep blues in it, it had greens in it, and it had white specks. And she picked the two halves of that sphere up, and she brought them together, and they locked. She thought, wow, and then she held it, and she looked at it. Now, little did Chance know that this sphere that she was holding would change her lives and the lives of all the people on this island forever. She took that sphere and she started down that rocky path. That veil of darkness was starting to pull over, and she moved very quickly. She was stealthy. She was like a wolf moving through underbrush. She was amazing. And she came back to their great cauldron, and she came in, and the fires had been built up for that evening. And she went straight to that cauldron and started to climb. Now, others saw her, and they saw this strange thing she had in her hand, and they followed her and watched her, and she climbed to the top, and then she took two charred branches, opened that sphere up, and set a burning ember. It was like lava rock that they would use for fuel into one half. And she took it, and she locked it. Now she could feel the energy. It was there, it was in her hands, but there was no heat on her hands. And everyone just watched her. And then she set it down, and there was a rock ledge, and she laid down and fell sound asleep. She was exhausted. And after several hours, she woke up. And when she woke up, that whole community was there in that cavern. They were perched everywhere. All those families that lived in that cavern, all their eyes were on her and on that sphere. And when she woke up, she shook her head, and she went over to that sphere, and she reached down and she picked it up and she held it again, and she could feel that energy inside. She could feel it. And she opened it, and sure enough, that piece of lava rock was still glowing still hot. She put it back together and set it down. Now, Chance, she was a leader in this community. She was the youngest of the leaders. And she looked at everyone and she really had their attention. And she said, you know, yesterday we were exploring down the island. And my friends, they came back, but I saw what looked like an opening, and it was a small cavern, and inside it was a cauldron. And she goes, I believe no one here ever thought there was another cauldron on this island. I don't think we know we had no means to ever start a fire again. But she said this, and this burning ember, my friends and I are going to start a fire in that cauldron. And we're going to leave here, and we're going to get this flame to it. Now, while she was saying this, there was an old lady there. Her name was Yamaya. And she sat very quietly, and she was she was ancient. And she always sat and stood at a bit of a list. It was like there was a weight hanging off one shoulder. And she looked up at Chance and the others, and she said, Chance, what are you trying to prove by this? Starting another flame. We have everything we need in this sacred flame. We have nourishment. We have the spiritual. We have everything. Warmth. Dividing that flame, you could divide our community. You could use the fuel that we have. It's not limitless. She said, Chance, tell me one thing. Tell me what the end is. What do you want to get from starting another flame? Now, Chance stood up. And she addressed Jemima, and she said, look, you're old. The rest of your elders are old. But you once had dreams of adventure. We are young, and we have those same dreams. And I'm here to tell you, we don't know what the end will be. And my guess is neither did you when you were our age. But we are going to move that flame. And we are going to attempt it tomorrow. So, Yamaya, as they did often, especially her, she knew everybody was curious as to what might happen. She knew the young people were with her, so she just ended in a song to send a message to Chance. So, now, one thing I'd like everybody here to keep in mind that way back then, music would have been quite rudimentary. And my guess is Yamaya, she was old, so there's no way she was singing in key. So I think my interpretation could be spot on here. Sacred flame of tranquil light, hear us stand alone. Winds blow, the young run, long tethered leaves still fall. Light shine, light shine, light shine, light shine down. They inhale light, they exhale dark. Forgive me, but heed their song. Fires will burn, sacred lights dim, stars drift, then fall. Light shine, light shine, light shine, light shine down. Lift darkness, sing soft caress, beautiful light, love us all. Forgive us, hug them, hold them, shine through us all. Light shine, light shine, light shine, light shine down through you. Thank you. Well, Chance stood once again and faced him, and she said, we are going to move the flame, and we will do that tomorrow. So they did. The next day, they tried to transport that flame, and they failed, and they came back exhausted to that flame and to their families. And they tried 2 days later, and the same thing happened. They completely failed, and they came back. But then they decided on a type of relay where they moved that sphere and that flame along. And they worked together. And they never came back. And that Yamaya, who sat in a chair, she grew quieter than she already was. And she just went into a deep reflection. Now, at that flame, at the end of that island, there was euphoria. I know everybody here knows that feeling that when we're young and we conquer something, they dance. They literally danced around that, light that flame, light that flame. And they danced throughout that night, and that next morning, if you looked, they were just sprawled everywhere, sound asleep. And they woke up with the euphoria. And they found fuel, and they got food, and they never returned. They stayed at their little flame, in their cauldron, and in their cavern. But a few days later, and a little time later, Chance thought, you know what, we can start another fire. So she had them build a cauldron farther away, and they transported flame, and they started another fire. And then after that, she thought, you know what, we can do another one. So they transported flame and did another fire. So now there's 3 burning, and then another one. And time went on, but then Chance looked at her friends, all those young people. Their faces were drawn. They were gaunt. And they didn't smile like they did anymore. So she called them together and she said, look, what's wrong? What's wrong? And each and every one of them unloaded on her. They said, look, this fire before us, that was our dream. That was your dream. We did this together. But those fires, they're your dream. They're not for us. You're doing that for you. Each and every one of them. And why? Yamaya was right. We don't need to light fires everywhere. And Chance, she sat quietly, internalized this coming from them. And she sat quiet and she finally looked at them all. And in total grace, she said, you know what? You're right. Because down deep, she was relieved. She knew what she had done. And they agreed then to let those fires burn out. And they kept that one flame in that cauldron. But they agreed to something else. They decided to send 4 of their members back to the original flame and back to their families. So they started out on that path, and once again, you could see their shoulders, they perked up again. You could feel their energy. They were headed home. They were headed to see the people they loved. But you know what happened partway in that path? They ran into 4 people coming from the other direction. You see, Yamaya had said to them, if I was strong enough, I would go to them and commend them on their achievement and welcome them. You see, this is a happy story. And there's a whole lot of happy stories in this world. So they each went their own direction. The young people went and they joined their families again and they told them about what they had done and what they had accomplished. And those older people, the fathers and the aunts, they went on and they went to where Chance was and they all shared. These communities were healing right there and right then. And Chance, while all that was taking place, she looked up and she saw 3 seagulls in the sky doing just what seagulls do. And she thought, the sky opens up to them. It opens up like the notes in a melody. Chaos below, serenity above. The sunshine fills their being. The winds, tailwinds follow their step. Their light transcends dark. The grace of their flight, up there, the motion, the music, the mountains, a trilogy in space. The voice of our existence, she thought, is up there with them. The spirit of our brethren is up there with them. She thought, dance supreme, live sublime, and reign forever. Soar, soar, soar. Thank you very much. And I'm going to close with one little piece here. I had a friend who spoke last week, and he talked about coincidence and how we think about coincidence. But last night, my wife and I, Beth and I, we were downtown, and I know Maureen was there, and we were sitting at a table. And there was a whole bunch of us, and we were listening to a singer. And a lady came in, and there was a young man with her, and he sat at our end of the table. So he was young, we were old, and the music's going, so we got our ear to him, we're talking to him. But he came from an island called Mauritius. So I asked him, I said, it's in the middle. He showed me on a map, and it's off the coast of Africa, but it's way out in the middle of that ocean. Africa's here, and I asked him, did you ever go to India? Nope. He said, I've only ever been to neighboring islands. And then he showed me pictures. So it was just a lovely evening. We all chatted with him, we exchanged our numbers. But when I went home, I thought, I'm going to read more about Mauritius. And Mark Twain had said, when God invented Mauritius, he used that to create heaven. That's what he thought of it. And I read where someone else said, like, this was like nirvana. And it's funny because this story was I'd already prepared it, and I had that opening about nirvana and about utopia. I mean, it was a beautiful moment to think that I'd met this young person. I had never met anyone in my life from an island like that. So, coincidence, pay attention to it. Thank you.
All right, great, ladies and gentlemen.